Hey, what's up, metalheads? Mike back with the debut episode of Decades. Now, Decades is a segment I want to do on the channel where I will take any topic, like as for example, today is the best rock albums of the 1990s, and then I pick out the best one year by year. So we're going to do 1990, 1991, 1992, etc., etc. This is something that I think that would be a lot of fun to do on the channel because it provides a lot of conversation. I want to do this for TV shows, movies, video games, music, anything like that is on the table. But for the first one, I thought, what is more fun for me to talk about than these old things that, some of you kids might not know are called compact discs. That was very much my musical awakening as a teenager and in the 1990s when everything changed for us musically. That's what I kind of want to focus on. So music, I think, is the most subjective thing ever, guys. So if I leave something off that you're looking for, understand it probably was an insult. It's just been a long time since the 1990s, so it's hard for me to remember everything, just going off of my collection, going off of my recollection, and things like that. So if you think of something that I left off that you really, really did appreciate, please drop it in the comments below because I might want to revisit it. It might be a lot of fun for me. I just probably forgot. Also, this list is just rock music, so you're not going to hear Shania Twain or Notorious B.I.G. I think those are great artists. They just don't fit on a list like this. But as for rock, all types of rock here. We got hard rock, we got metal, we got folk rock, we got pop rock, we got industrial, electronic, you name it, it counts for me. So it will kind of be a wide barometer when it comes to rock. But like I said, no pop, no country, no R&B, and no rap music are going to be on this list. Also, these are what I consider complete albums. There are going to be no one or two hit wonders. There's going to be ones where you put on the album and you can listen to almost every single track and have a great time with it. And no greatest hits, no live albums, because I feel like those do cheat. So this is probably going to be a lengthy episode, but I want to get that explanation out here for what this episode was going to be first. But let's begin at the beginning, guys, with 1990. I got to talk about a couple of albums that were in consideration before I make each pick. With 1990, first I got to begin with The Razor's Edge by AC/DC. I think this is probably the last complete album that AC/DC did. I think Black Ice was okay, but again, I think this is the last one of that classic sound, yet still was kind of making its way into the 1990s and still working. But Thunderstruck, I think, has just become a stadium anthem at this point. Any sporting event you go to, you'll hear that song playing. It's obviously it's one of my 7-year-old's favorite songs. He loves it to death. Violator by Depeche Mode. This is basically an early greatest hits album for them, honestly. I mean, World in My Eyes, Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence, Policy of Truth. This had a little bit of everything that really helped them capture their sound but bring it into a mainstream audience. I think this was probably their biggest radio album. I mean, I think mostly of Depeche Mode as an 80s band, but I think this is the one who made them go from an 80s band to, modern audiences, and everyone was really, really digging that sound at the time. And yeah, just a great album all the way through. Shake Your Moneymaker by the Black Crowes, another one of those I felt like was a modern band that was able to capture that classic rock and soul kind of sound. Twice as Hard, Jealous Again, Shucks Angels, Hard to Handle. I mean, this is just a great album all the way through. I don't think they ever reached those heights again. So that's one of those things where your freshman album really kind of is a detriment to you because you're never able to capture those highs again. But if I've got to make a pick for the album this year, for me, I was still pretty much in the metalhead phase, the 80s hair metal and the hard rock, the thrash music at the time. And I have to go with Holy Wars by Megadeth because I think that might be Megadeth's best album from beginning to end. And I think it's because it's probably like what I'd probably say is was their last thrash album until like United Abominations in like 2007. I think this one was probably the last one that was like that. They went a little more commercial to try to compete. When Metallica went a little radio, they tried to go a little radio. And a lot of the metal bands at the time were like, okay, we got to adapt or perish here. We got to kind of go for a more commercial sound. But Rust in Peace was not that. I think Holy Wars, Punishment Due is one of my favorite Megadeth tracks, Hangar 18. I think Marty Friedman was the perfect complement to Dave Mustaine because Dave Mustaine, obviously, badass guitar player. So are you going to want to play lead guitar in a band with Dave Mustaine in it? No, probably not. But Marty Friedman was able to complement him so well. I think about his solo in Tornado of Souls. Melt your face off. Just an awesome blend with the band there. And Rust in Peace is my top album for 1990. How about 1991? Let's look at some of these runners up here. Blood Sugar Sex Magic by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, man. I think this kind of changed everything for me. It was the first I really accepted something like funk rock. It was a weird combination, but I loved it. No one else sounded like them. I still think to this day I can recite every lyric to Suck My Kiss, and I used to have to kind of do that in secret because my mom would hear me listen to that album and be like, I don't approve of this stuff. But that happened a lot in my household. 10 by Pearl Jam. I mean, I think about one of the most influential Seattle grunge rock albums of all time. Sure, it's probably been played to death at this point, and a lot of people are just sick of it. But you got to, I'm not doing that in this list, guys. I'm talking about stuff that was big at the time, and I think still is in consideration for talking about the best album of that year. I don't let nostalgia affect my mood one way or the other. I don't look at it like embarrassed, like people like to pretend they didn't listen to like New Kids on the Block or Vanilla Ice, things like that. I never do that. I'm like, that was a pop culture moment thing, and embrace it. And with Pearl Jam 10, yeah, it's a great album beginning to end. Some of my favorite guitar riffs ever of that generation, and definitely a band that I think that I say they had really great albums after that, but nothing ever really kind of eclipsed 10. 10 was always just, stellar from beginning to end. I love it. No More Tears by Ozzy. What's funny about this is that was supposed to be Ozzy Osbourne's retirement album. That was his farewell. And here we are 30 years later, and the guy's still going. So I think that's one of those guys that's just married to rock music. He doesn't know how to do anything else. He's been doing it since he's a teenager. He's never going to get away from it. But I think that No More Tears was probably one of his best ever, in that, like some of these other artists where they were trying to transition and keep a mainstream audience, they tried to make some tweaks to their sound. And a lot of people would consider that, they went radio, they went commercial, whatever. But with that, I mean, think about what Zakk Wylde did in that album. It was just so stellar. This was pre-Black Label Society. Actually, it might have been about the same time he did his solo album. I'm sure. But before really Black Label Society, that's a fun word to say, Zakk Wylde really just brings that record to life and compliments Ozzy in the best ways as he had done previous albums. But I think it was just perfect timing with that album. Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 by Guns N' Roses. It's hard for me to... the next couple guys, any of these could have been number one on this list for 1991. Just a really, really strong year. I think Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, that's their White Album for Guns N' Roses, where it just had every type of different musical influence, and they poured it into that record. And it's one of the most flawlessly produced albums of all time. I can't think of too much about both of those albums that I don't love. I remember when it came out, I heard November Rain for the first time. I was like, what is this? After coming off of, I didn't count Lies, but I'm thinking just, from like Welcome to the Jungle to November Rain, it's like, what in the hell? But, now I look back, I'm like, okay, they were just too epic to be contained to just like a punk rock band or whatever you want to kind of call them when they came out and they exploded on the scene. But yeah, a perfect album, both of them. And I do consider them one album because they released on the same day. And no Guns N' Roses fan was like, I'm going to buy number 2 and I'll get number 1 later. They were getting both of them, right? The Black Album by Metallica, yes, guys, I know you're screaming, but that's when they went commercial. Yes, but it is still an amazing album. And it might be up there with Dark Side of the Moon as the most flawlessly produced album of all time. What Bob Rock was able to, the sound he was able to get out of them was just so perfect. But I mean, again, it was the first of their not thrash albums. It was first where they kind of went commercial, and it started a long list of mistakes that the band made through the 90s. But again, you can look back on it now and say, you know what? Yeah, that might have been the turning point for Metallica, but still, there's not really what I would call a bad song on the album. It just might not have been the sound that you were looking for Metallica to do at the time. But again, that or the Guns N' Roses could have been easily my number 1, guys. But I have to go with Nevermind by Nirvana, guys. This was the moment for my generation. We had been waiting for that like breakout rebellion rock song for our generation. It Smells Like Teen Spirit was it, guys. And Nirvana, Nevermind, just kind of, it killed hair rock. It killed a lot of pop rock 80s bands. It just murdered it, and it changed music to where it just went in a new direction with the reaction to the grunge sound and the alternative music. It just completely changed everything. And there's a lot of people, maybe a generation behind mine, that think this is when rock music died. For me, it was a birth of a new generation, and it was our time. It was my generation's time to stand up and have that moment and say, this is our sound. And Nirvana just encapsulated that. So it would be impossible for me not to pick Nevermind just for how powerful and meaningful that album was to my generation. 1992, guys. Vulgar Display of Power by Pantera. This was the aggression in rock that I didn't know that I needed at the time. I was like, wow, that's just so angry. But I would never really consider myself that much. I mean, Metallica was about as angry as rock as I had gotten at that point. So when I heard Pantera, it was just like, wow, and you think about the sound they put together with Dimebag and Vince. It was such a powerful sound. And Vulgar Display of Power, every track just absolutely rips. I could put that on right now after I finish this and be happy. My first real dose of industrial rock. Now, I didn't get into Nine Inch Nails until later. It was actually about another year or two off. But Psalm 69 by Ministry was my first real dose of the industrial rock sound and using like overdubs and these weird like sound clips from movies and things. It was just such an interesting idea of adding computer to your rock music, basically. But Psalm 69, that is a spectacular record. Again, not a single track on the you would skip. A lot of those songs you've heard on commercials and in movies and things like that. It was a very, very big album when it came out, and it has aged wonderfully. I listened to it yesterday when I put this list together. Rage Against the Machine by Rage Against the Machine. Look, guys, this is when rock stars used to protest with their music. They didn't go on Twitter. They didn't go on some award show and tell you why you should do blank. They protested through their music. They got their ideas out there through their music. And guys, at 14 years old, in 1992, that imprinted on me. That was just what I wanted to hear. That was the way you got what you were feeling across. That album has so much emotion and pain and aggression on it that it's just, man, it's just a wonderful record. And it was nothing like I had ever heard at the time. Still to this day, I don't think there's another band that sounds like Rage Against the Machine. And yeah, that album has aged incredibly well. Now, when Angel Dust by Faith No More came out, now this was after they really broke out big when Epic and was it The Real Thing, was that album called, in 1989. That's what it was like, okay, look, these guys, whatever they do next, it's going to be huge for them because they're riding that wave of success that they really had that breakthrough success with that album and that moment, that video, and everyone wanted to see what they did next. And then they did an experimental album. And at the time, people were like, wow, what a fuck up, guys. You had this opportunity to make this absolutely amazing imprint on mainstream rock and you made an experimental album. However, over the years, 30 years later, a lot of people look at Angel Dust as their best album. So it's one of them just like at the time, people just weren't ready for that. But here's the thing, guys. Mike Patton, I think his vocal range is as incredible as Chris Cornell's. It's just different. But as far as like a rock voice goes, man, no one else sounded like Mike Patton. And that album is just impressive as hell. The Sexorcisto, Devil Music Volume 1 by White Zombie. Now, I first saw this when Beavis and Butthead were breaking out big, and that's when I heard this, and they were like, these guys are awesome. And I agreed. I didn't understand a word he was saying, but I loved like the monster movie aesthetic they were using, and Rob's look, obviously, and they had Sean on the bass, and she was like, wowza. You know, it was just like one of those things that just had the monster trucks and the muscle cars in the music video. It was just perfect for me at 14 years old when I first saw that. And yeah, to this day, I still know every single lyric to Thunder Kiss 65. I named my first Mustang after Black Sunshine. So yeah, very influential album to me. And it was just when I was experimenting with new sounds in rock that I hadn't done before. Gravedancer's Union by Soul Asylum. First CD that I ever bought, guys, my very first trip when I made the transition from tape to compact disc. That was the album that I bought first because Runaway Train was really big on the radio. But that album was just perfect. I mean, there's not a skippable song on the whole album. It is definitely their magnum opus. They never really did anything as great as that again. I liked Let Your Dim Light Shine, but it never really quite reached these heights. But Gravedancer's Union, again, beginning to end, is just a perfect rock album. And on most lists, most years, rather, this would be number one for that year, but there are a couple more that I would put above them. Flip a coin on these next two, but I had to make a decision. It was between Core by Stone Temple Pilots, because, look, that was my full transition to grunge rock, where Nirvana opened that door, the whole Seattle thing, the Seattle movement. Still a Plush. I think that's really what threw me over. Sex Type Thing, Wicked Garden. Well, I said Wicked Garden sounded like just like a weird twist of like AC/DC, but like, I don't know, just this incredible voice from Scott Weiland. I love the sound that they were bringing. Creep was obviously a big one. Just, yeah, I think that might be my most played album of that year, but I had to make a choice and I picked Dirt by Alice in Chains. It's my best album of 1992. There's just something. I studied music. That was something I did all through junior high and high school. I thought I was going to be a music teacher one day, so I loved studying music theory. And there was something about the way that Cantrell and Staley were able to harmonize over that just like sickening sound that they made musically. And it just blended so well. And again, to this day, no band ever has sounded like Alice in Chains. Now I know they're trying to go still without Lane Staley, and it's just not for me. I'm not digging. That's how people felt about Guns N' Roses without Slash. That's how I feel about Alice in Chains without Lane Staley. It's just not the same. I love Jerry Cantrell, but it was their powers combined that made that band what it was. And Dirt is just an amazing rock record. It really was ahead of its time, where it wasn't getting a ton of radio play, but I think it kind of did after like Jar of Flies really got a mainstream. But I think that Dirt really just such a sick sound. That's all I say about it. And I mean that in the best way. I think Wood Wood is probably still my favorite Alice in Chains song. Such a kick-ass jam. I love it. So 1993, guys, my freshman year of high school. And this is when basically I was old enough to get my first job, and every single paycheck I would just go to the CD store, buy 2 or 3 or 4 albums, and that was kind of everything that I worked for at the time. In Utero by Nirvana did the impossible. It followed up one of the best rock albums ever, one of the most influential rock albums ever, and it did it in an impressive way. Now, obviously, I don't think it could have possibly filled those shoes that Nevermind left, but it did really, really meet some of the unreal expectations they have on. I think this is some of Dave Grohl's best drum work. I think about like Scentless Apprentice, and yeah, I mean, for this being like the swan song for the band, unknowingly at the time, it was an impressive effort. And yeah, again, not a skippable song on the entire album. If you are into the Nirvana sound, you're going to find plenty to like on that record. Undertow by Tool. At the time, I had never heard anything like this. I love the bass riff on Sober. I think it really was their music videos that got me interested in their music, because you remember the video for Sober was just like, wow, what is this? But yeah, definitely just a weird mix. But it was just the beginning of what that band, the sound that they were going to make. But for me, it was something that was very memorable getting that album at the time. And not really liking it at first, but keeping listening to it. And then I just loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And that's one of those I do revisit from time to time and be like, man, this is really an impressive album for that band. Candlebox by Candlebox. Now, look, guys, I got little girl hands. I've never could play the guitar. I got the voice, so I sang. But I wanted to play guitar so bad. And I think Far Behind by Candlebox was the only thing I ever learned to play on guitar. Do, 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 do. This is the beginning. The whole like 4 or 5 notes was about the only thing, but you talk about another band who their debut album was great, and everything they did after was always a big letdown. That was Candlebox. It's perfect of a debut album as you can get, and they never were able to get there again. But I think like You was probably one of the kickest ass songs ever. But yeah, it's a really fun album to revisit from time to time. How about some Smashing Pumpkins? I think Siamese Dream is one that just kind of almost gets kind of swept under the rug at this point because Melancholy was so huge for them. But Siamese Dream, I loved that crunchy sound that they made, but then you had like Billy Corgan's like kind of light voice combined with it. Somehow it worked. It was weird. He doesn't sound like the voice of a rock singer. He had that unique soft voice, but it just worked really well with that, like I said, that crunchy kind of sound that they were going for. And and I think Siamese Dream really did show. I mean, it had some big hits off of that album. I mean, I think like Rocket and Disarm, obviously. But I still think that was just kind of a taste of, the creativity that band had in them. And we would see more of that in a couple years from now. But guys, Sound of White Noise by Anthrax is one that a lot of people probably won't have on their list. I think to change singers and then make a perfect record with your first record with that singer. It's like the first time since like Back in Black by AC/DC that has happened. And Sound of White Noise is okay. They moved on from Joey Belladonna, who I loved Anthrax in the 80s, but for the sound that they were going for in the early 90s, like I said, a lot of these metal bands in the 80s were deciding they needed to change their sound a little bit, and changing to John Bush, I thought that was the perfect complement to that new sound they were going for. And Sound of White Noise to the day might be in the running for my favorite Anthrax album because his voice just matched that band so brilliantly. It was amazing to know that John Bush actually turned down a role for Metallica. James wanted to focus on his guitar work, and they wanted to bring John Bush on as a singer, and he turned it down because he was a Metallica fan, and he didn't want to lose his Metallica, and then he joined Anthrax instead. And in fact, about this album only, the song Only, James Hetfield once told Scott Ian that he thinks Only is the perfect rock song, and I find it hard to disagree. Amazing album, guys. Check it out if you haven't. Now, it came down to 2 here. Get a Grip by Aerosmith is going to be my runner-up here. You want to talk about their comeback that started with Run DMC in the 80s. It culminated here. Here's where all of a sudden, they were on top of the world again. This album was just a hit machine. Every single they put out from this album was huge. It made them a big presence on MTV. All their videos were really, really big. Living on the Edge. Crazy, amazing. I mean, this band was just on fire at the time. And it really was their full culmination of their second renaissance. And I know that a lot of people, classic rockers, are going to be like, that's not Aerosmith. But you know what? Again, they adjusted their sound to go with what audiences wanted, and they definitely found a touchstone with that one. But guys, I have to go with Bat Out of Hell 2, Back into Hell by Meatloaf. Songs written by Jim Steinman. And I bring that up because, guys, Meatloaf and Jim Steinman, solo, they're just okay. But when you put those two together, something magical happens. They are the peanut butter and jelly of rock and roll. And no it's almost like his voice sounds like these guys sound like they should be something on Broadway. They really do, but yet they were able to make like this amazing mashup into a rock opera. And anytime these two guys get together, magic happened. It was just incredible. And you think about, they're following up a sequel to maybe the greatest rock and roll album of all time, and Bat Out of Hell, with Bat Out of Hell 2, and it meets and exceeds expectations. And Meatloaf was managing his Little League baseball team, his kids' Little League baseball team, a year before they decided to get together and make this album. And then he has a #1 album in his career, completely changed his trajectory at that point. So yeah, this album, beginning to end, the most amazing production, the most unique sound, and it's just one of those, I mean, every song was like 8 or 12 minutes. It's just an epic, epic album. And beginning to end, guys, it does not stop. It kicks you in the face. It pulls at your heartstrings. It does a little bit of everything. I think it's just an amazing album. And I can't believe we've lost both Meat and Jim now. But you know what? They will live on forever through these two albums, I think. They are just absolutely stunning. And yeah, Bat Out of Hell 2, guys. Spectacular. Let's move on to 1994. I think this might be my most full year here. I had the most ones that I kind of wanted to mention, and my hardest time picking a winner. Let's begin with Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails. Now, this is where I really got into Nine Inch Nails. I didn't really know about them. They weren't getting a ton of radio play. People like to think that Pretty Hate Machine was getting a lot of radio play, and it's like they did later. It's like they pulled those songs back later after they really broke up big here. Closer really brought Nine Inch Nails into the mainstream, for sure. But I think about some songs like March of the Pigs that were just like full on, like hard rock. And this was just like, for me, this was when I really got into industrial hard rock music a lot. I really liked it. This is like My Life with a Thrill Kill Cold. Obviously, go back and getting all the Ministry albums and stuff. I really dove into it. It was because of Downward Spiral. Just such a spectacular album. I love it. It's still to this day is one you can put on and just get into that mood, be transported back to the 90s. It really is a lot of fun. The Blue Album by Weezer. You won't hear me say this very much. You hear people be like with MCU movies, they're like, it wasn't the best, but you know what? I had a good time, and so I'm going to give it a thumbs up because I had fun doing it. That's me with Weezer. When I listen to the Blue Album by Weezer, I'm just having a fun time. Now, Buddy Holly is obviously what brought me attention when he got in the Sweater song, and then My Name is Jonas. Again, I love it. I mean, it's On the Shelf. She puts my love on the shelf. I can't remember what the exact title of it is, but I could put this album on today and recite every lyric without a doubt because I listen to this pretty much on repeat during 1994. Under the Table and Dreaming by Dave Matthews Band. Now, Dave Matthews was a band I really wasn't clicking with until I got dragged with a group of friends to see him live. And once I saw him live, I really was like, okay, this is a very talented band. I never really looked at it that way. I think Satellite's probably my standout for that album. What would you say? But just a great record, beginning to end. And I don't know, a lot of people will say, oh, Dave Matthews isn't rock. I don't know exactly where you would put Dave Matthews, but I think that album was ahead of its time. And I didn't appreciate it really when it came out, but I did appreciate it later, so I'm going to count it here. Dookie by Green Day. Yes, guys, I know it was overplayed like hell, but it was overplayed like hell because it was a spectacular rock album. There was not a bad song on the whole album. If you liked one song, you liked them all. You say they all kind of sound the same. Sure, but you know what? They had a sound, and they stuck with it. And I think that's why Green Day is still going today, because they know what works for them. But that's, again, another album that's just a lot of fun. I mean, guys, they called their album Dookie. Were you expecting to take anything seriously? Really? Smash by The Offspring. Again, I think this might take my title for my most played album of 1994. They could come out and play hit. It really changed a lot of stuff. A lot of people changing their sounds to kind of just be like, okay, let's do some experimental stuff. If these new bands coming out are making all these weird experimental sounds and then making the transition from like a punk band to like a mainstream rock band, you couldn't have really done it better here. Self-Esteem, obviously, is probably the one that I think probably got the most radio play. And it's one of those, again, to the day I hear it and I'm like, it still somehow almost feels overplayed, but yet I'm going to listen to it because it brings back the good memories. 16 Stone by Bush is another one. Radio probably drove this album into the ground, but everything's Zen. It just had like that beginning riff that I just loved to death. Little Things is excellent. Machine Head is, oh my God, if I hear that song again. But Glycerin, you still hear Glycerin come up on, teen romance movies and stuff today, So I mean, we were watching Midnight Club, which does take place in the 90s, but of course that song is featured on there. But yeah, really amazing debut album. And again, I don't think that they ever really took those heights again. I'm making this decision live right now. Let's talk about Super Unknown by Soundgarden. I think that Chris Cornell is a rock god, and I don't think that he was appreciated enough. It seems like people did after he passed away, sadly, but at the time I was like, I think about when Bad Motorfinger came out. Oh my God, the first time I heard Outshined, my mind was blown. I had never heard a voice like that. But I still thought that they could make some improvements to their sound and make a complete album. And Super Unknown was a complete album, I think so. Now, I know we've all heard Black Hole Sun a bazillion times, but there's a lot more on that album. Actually, you know what? I would listen to Black Hole Sun a million times before ever listening to Spoon Man again. Oh my God, local radio out here with Spoon Man. To the day, if they play Soundgarden, they play freaking Spoon Man. But that album is just really awesome. The Day I Tried to Live is just so good, guys. So I had to go with something else for number one, though. For 1994, Throwing Copper by Live. I mean, from the moment you pressed play, guys, All Over You, Lightning Crashes, I Alone, White Discussion. I mean, this is basically a greatest hits album. Every single they put out was just massive for them with this album. And again, they had some good albums after that, but never quite a complete album like this. And I think this was perfectly timed. It was right when we were ready for something like this. Selling the Drama, I think, really was what kind of broke it out for them. But yeah, everything they put out from this album, just mega hit for them. And yeah, I saw them on this tour. It was a lot of fun. Really liked them live. But this album, again, I don't know how I could have picked anything else. And you saw the competition for this year. It's amazing that they were able to do that. How about some 1995, guys? Collective Soul by Collective Soul. I think Collective Soul might be the most underrated band of the 1990s. I think they had over a dozen number one singles during the era, and no one ever really talks about them. This is the one that really broke them. But they had Shine with their first album, but this one, you know, they had Gel. They had a lot of other big hits off of this album. And it's another one of those where I'll put on the day and be like, where the river flows. You know, it kicks ass, man. I think the Collective Soul, again, super underrated. So check them out. If you haven't, I don't know how you would have missed it if you were live in the 1990s. Tragic Kingdom, I no doubt. I won't lie, I had never really heard much about this band until I saw them open for Bush in 1996. Goo Goo Dolls were at that show too before they really broke out. So it was kind of an awakening for me at that show. That was a time when there were so many new bands coming out. Radio wasn't really playing them yet. And you would catch that opening act for some bands that you like and you would really get into them, go check out their album the next day. And that was the case here with Tragic Kingdom. To the day, my wife's pick for the album of the 90s is Tragic Kingdom. She's a big Gwen Stefani fan. It all started there. What's the Story? Morning Glory by Oasis. Now look, I don't think they were quite the Beatles like they thought they were, but I felt like it was like one of those kind of things if the Beatles had been born onto this generation, that's kind of what their sound would have been like. So I think they were, very respectful to my favorite band of all time, the Beatles. So I'm always going to appreciate that, even if they were the Gallagher brothers were very unlikable. I miss this band, incredibly miss them. I wish they would come back. I know that they just could never really get along. It's a shame, man, because the sound that they made was amazing. And What's the Story? Morning Glory. I mean, Wonderwall to this day, that plays in a bar, and every single person in there is singing along with it. Champagne Supernova was a mega hit for them. It's, again, a brilliant album all the way through. Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette was very close to winning this one, guys. I think the whole freaking album was released as a single. It feels like that, at least. Again, I know I've said it a lot, but every single track. And that's why I have a lot of these albums on here, because there were no skippable songs. A lot of these songs at the point where you feel like, okay, they're almost self-parody. At this point, you think about Ironic, which is just so overdone. But, there's so much more to that album than that, or You Oughta Know. Every damn song was just perfect. And again, I think with her, it was just perfect timing. That movement, Lilith Fair was breaking big. And you weren't seeing a lot of female rockers at the time. And I think she was before Hole and things like that were really breaking big. And Alanis Morissette was just, that fine line of straddling aggressive rock and pop rock. She was right somewhere in the middle where she could get that crossover audience, the pop audience and the rock audience who all flocked to her. And it was just a brilliant album that, I'll listen to anytime, no questions asked. But guys, I have to go with Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness by the Smashing Pumpkins. Incredible risk, guys, to make a double album at this point in their career. But there was zero filler on it. That's what's amazing. You get a lot of double albums, you get a lot of filler on there. Look, I love Foo Fighters, but they put out that double album. I'm like, yeah, I can see why you put out a double album, because you had a lot of these tracks you didn't think were strong enough for a single album. With this, it's like every song, I mean, just showed that their creativity at the time was just overflowing. It was amazing. And they won numerous Grammys and stuff for this album. I mean, it was a huge, huge success. And a lot of those songs, like I said, are still pop culture songs. Like I said, I think I saw a trailer for something the other day that had 1979 in it. So it's a very influential album. And it just, again, they took all of this creativity they had. They had a unique sound, and they just poured it into this almost 2 hours of music. And guys, it was bloody brilliant, and it's still brilliant today. And that brings us to the halfway mark. So what about 1996 here? I got to begin with Bringing Down the Horse by the Wallflowers. Now, everybody thinks that this was a one-hit album because of, One Headlight. This album is so much greater than just One Headlight, Three Marlenas. The only difference, I mean, this album was really, really good beginning to end. I just don't think anyone ever really tried anything outside of One Headlight, and I'm not sure how much radio success they had outside of that. I know that they put out a single for Heroes and the Godzilla soundtrack, and that's what kind of people associated with them with, was those two songs, but not on this album. But again, I think go back and listen to that album beginning to end. You'll have a good time with it. Evil Empire by Rage Against the Machine. Somehow they improved on a perfect album and made an even more perfect album, because look, I love their self-titled debut, like I said, for all the things I mentioned earlier, but somehow Evil Empire just took that sound and just made it even angrier and more aggressive, and Tom Morello just exploded on this album. And you think about some of his guitar riffs, obviously Bulls on Parade are the one that anyone and everyone knows. I mean, people who didn't like Rage Against the Machine, they liked Bulls on Parade because it was such a badass song. But yeah, beginning to end, guys, beginning to end, you will feel a little angrier, but you'll feel a little more satisfied. I think that it really is magic in that way. Antichrist Superstar by Marilyn Manson. I'm old enough to remember when this was controversial, guys. I mean, I remember people being like, if you had this album, they thought you were like a Satan worshiper or a pedophile or something. They thought something was up with you, because the guy was very weird. It was very unique, and he was bringing back shock rock. It really was. We hadn't seen since like David Bowie and Alice Cooper, but being way more in your face with it, with a lot of like with the sacrileges and things like that. But the album, guys, is just awesome. I think about the Reflecting God and The Man That You Fear. Those two songs just like imprinted on me to a way to where I just could not think about anything except this album. That's easily my most played album of 1996. It really was incredible, and still to the day, Marilyn's best effort. But I have to go with my pick of the year, Enema by Tool. Now, I will not lie to you guys. I was not crazy about this album when it first came out. I thought it was a little weird. I wanted it to be kind of more straightforward like Undertow was. But over time, I was like, oh, okay. As they would put it, my third eye opened, and man, did it click for me. And I played this album so much, just not in 1996. I played it so much probably from like 98 to 2000. This was my most played album. And man, it's just an amazing, amazing album. What Maynard and Danny Carey are able to do in that band to give them their unique sound, it just really was just, it was the forte of this album, just the drumming of Danny Carey, the long aggressive screams of Maynard, and again, it was almost somehow like an art rock record. It really was good, and the fact that they paid tribute to my favorite comedian of all time, and Bill Hicks, was obviously a nice little bonus. But again, I don't think that Tool's ever done anything as amazing as this. They've had amazing albums. I mean, it's one of my favorite bands ever. But Enema was definitely the peak of the mountain for them. And yeah, best record of 1996, no doubt about it. 97, a couple I want to talk about first. So Much for the Afterglow by Everclear. Kind of proved that they weren't like that one-hit wonder with Santa Monica, I think. They had some huge radio hits on this one. I think Father of Mine, Everything to Everyone. Was Bayou a New Life on that album? I think it was. But again, that's another one of those albums where I bought their first album and I was like, yeah, Santa Monica's good. And there might be another keeper like Heart Spark or something's pretty good. But everything else was kind of like, With this one, every song I was down for, and I loved it quite a bit. Around the Fur by the Deftones. Man, that showed that alternative rock could still kind of lean metal and get radio play. I think that was the time where he changed. It kind of was the precursor to what they would become with White Pony, which I think White Pony's a better album, honestly. But Around the Fur is just, man, it's just aggressive as hell. And I mean, I must say it was almost kind of, it was leaning new metal. It was really before new metal. I think they kind of took that sound that Korn was making at the time, but Korn hadn't really exploded yet. But I think that at this point, they were kind of one of the pioneers of leaning, showing that, look, you can still scream aggressively and get radio play. You really, really can. So I give them credit for that. The Fat of the Land by The Prodigy. Man, this was huge crossover success in the U.S. for them with this album. Firestarter really blew up here. Breathe was a huge hit here. Smack My Bitch Up. But this actually is the album that actually got me into their older stuff, and it was really when I first started getting into electronic rock. You know, like I said, I kind of talked about the industrial thing, but this was just full-on electronic rock that obviously the next band I talk about really got me into it. But with The Prodigy, yeah, this made me go back and check out their earlier albums and just absolutely falling in love with everything they did. But yeah, The Fat of the Land, again, not a bad song on there. Homework by Daft Punk. Now this, perhaps one of the best debut albums ever. This took electronic rock really to the next level. Really brought it to the mainstream, I think, because I think it crossed over because it even found success in like dance clubs too, and that was something that was really big at the time to have that kind of music in dance clubs, and then being able to find the mainstream success on the radio and stuff. So I mean, they were getting radio play, they were getting crossover play. They really were hitting several different demographics here, and I think that's why that album worked so well for them. And I miss this band enormously so. I love them so much. But my album of the year, guys, I gotta go with the first record, I think, of the post-grunge era. And it's amazing because it was led by the guy that led the grunge era by of course, I'm talking about Dave Grohl. I almost said Dave Mustaine. Dave Grohl, Color and the Shape by Foo Fighters. I mean, look, I know that Everlong is probably Foo Fighters' most overplayed song, but it might also be one of their best songs. I mean, I think Monkey Rich, honestly, when I heard that was the first one, I was like, oh, okay. So they aren't just going to be, hey, that's that one guy that was in Nirvana. They're going to be just a powerhouse on their own. Now, at the time, I had no idea they'd become as huge as they became over the next 20 years. But I think Color and the Shape was just that first step into what the band would eventually become. And what it eventually became is one of my favorite bands of all time. And it began with Color and the Shape because, again, I think that album, man, is just a banger. Again, I think that you will put it on and you will just be head bobbing, tapping your foot, punching a wall, having a great time with it because it just kicks so much ass. And a lot of people consider it the best Foo Fighters album. It's probably my second favorite. I still thought that Wasting Time was probably, was it Wasting Time? Is that what it's called? Anyway, the one with Rope on it, the one with Walk on it. Wasting Light. There we go. But talking about a lot of albums here, forgetting about what some names are. But yeah, Color and the Shape, 1997's best album. 98, guys. Hellbilly Deluxe by Rob Zombie. Now, I was already a big White Zombie fan. It's quite sad to hear he was going out on his own, but for whatever reason, I think he created the perfect Halloween album. You think about like Dragula and Living Dead Girl. You can't see a horror movie trailer without one of those songs, it seems like. For real, though, this feels like what you always thought White Zombie would eventually become. They were moving more towards the electronic and less of the 90s metal kind of act. So it made a lot of sense for Rob to make this move before he started directing movies and things like that. But again, this is an album that's an absolute staple. Every single year for Halloween, we will always give this one a spin. Now, you guys know System of a Down really blew up in the 2000s, but you got to think that 1998, System of a Down, their debut album, came out. And I will not lie to you guys, the first time I heard Sugar, I wanted to grab the album from the stereo and throw it across the room because I hadn't heard anything like that. And then it just kind of turned to laughter. We were kind of laughing at how it sounds, and then we realized couldn't stop listening to it. We liked it quite a bit. So obviously, System is a band that was an acquired taste, but after a while, it got to a point where I couldn't stop listening to it. And while they would hit bigger commercial success in the 2000s, her debut album is actually really good. War is kind of my standout track on that album. I like it a lot. Devil Without a Cause by Kid Rock. Now, this is where we started getting more into the new metal era, a little bit of rap kind of thrown into rock and things like that. A little bit of a hybrid out there. A lot of these bands were starting to kind of experiment with some things. But man, I think Kid Rock, just people either could not stand him or they absolutely loved him. But you can't deny that the guy had a big impact in 1998. I think Ball with the Ball was probably the most played song of that year, probably the rest of the 90s, and it still slaps, guys. I still love it. I still love that song. I don't care at all. But this is one of those albums I can still put on in every single word. Was playing it on the streaming device the other day, and then I realized, this might be a little too cussy for my kids around. But yeah, I mean, Cowboy, who doesn't love that? I don't think that Cowboy can come on and everyone doesn't just start singing along with it. So a huge album for them. With Godsmack. Again, another band I think will kind of break out bigger with albums after this, but their debut album, just their self-titled debut album, to me proved there was still a place for hard rock and metal on mainstream radio at the time. It almost felt like if you took, kind of looked like Lane Staley and made him like a hybrid with James Hetfield into Metallica. That's kind of what Sully always made me think of. But that band just absolutely rocked, man. It was everything that was just kicking ass. Just you put on, they actually had like guitar solos still and stuff. It was just all the stuff that hard rock had started to get away from. They brought back, and seeing them have some mainstream success was really, really cool for the genre, I think. But with this album, again, they didn't have a huge... Was Voodoo on this album? I can't remember. I remember Voodoo being really big on the radio, which surprised me a lot. I can't remember if that was this album or not. I should look for that right now. I'm going to look for it right now. Is Voodoo on this album? It is. The last track is Voodoo. How about that? But yeah, okay. So it was this album that got a little bit more radio success, but I think Awake was the song that was just like awesome to me when this album came out. But it wasn't good enough for Album of the Year. What was 1998? Follow the Leader by Korn. This took everything that their self-titled debut album and, of course, Life is Peachy had started, kind of the idea of added a little more oomph to it, because I always thought that those albums were really good, but they sounded kind of garage bandy. They needed a little more production. Now they would always get way more production after this, but this was their first one where they sound like the original version of themselves with just a little better quality to the album. And I think Follow the Leader is just an excellent record. I think Freak on a Leash obviously brought them to a lot of people that didn't really get into them up to that point. But yeah, that's one of the coolest videos I think of the 1990s. But It's On is really going. Got the Life is a staple of any Korn concert. And yeah, this was a band that really did just kind of become like the lone survivor, it seems like, of the nu metal era. I think they're the ones that really got really big during that time, and they're still putting out stuff today. And yeah, well, a lot of those bands, it seems like, are working, as insurance adjusters now or at oil change shops. They seem to be able to stick around, and it was easy to see with Follow the Leader that they were more than just some screamy, yelly, aggressive punk band. They had some talent, and they were going to kind of keep evolving that sound over the next few years, and it started with that album. 1999, guys, the last year of the decade. When The Fragile by Nine Inch Nails came out, it was a long-awaited follow-up to the Downward Spiral. And at the time, 5 years waiting for a new album seemed like a really, really long time. Now it seems like all the bands I listen to only put out one album every 5-6 years. But at the time, it felt like it had been forever. And it actually lived up to the wait, I think, the expectations. It really did hit in ways where they did continue to evolve their sound a little bit. I think Into the Void, and The Day the World Went Away, those sounded nothing like what you would have heard on, Wish or Broken or Fixed or any of that stuff. I think it was really just very different. But he never really forgot his roots. He always still stuck with the industrial electronic sound, and that record just continued to evolve. And yeah, I was in that weird phase where I was trying to collect all the Halo out. Do you know what that is? It's like everything that they would release would have a Halo number on it, including the singles and stuff. It was a really clever way for collectors to try to get them to buy everything by you. Really, really neat idea. I never did get them all, though. Some of them were really, really hard. Never did collect all those Pokemon. Make Yourself by Incubus. Now, I like Science better as an album, but I think this one probably is the most complete of those two albums. Science had a lot of neat ideas that were real random and chaotic still. This one, they started to calm down a little bit. And I know at this time, they weren't the first to do the whole record scratching thing in rock music, but I think they're the ones who really popularized it to where everybody started doing it after this. And I'm talking about that nu metal era, where a lot of bands were using the record scratching in their album and stuff. But yeah, Make Yourself, is beginning to end, is just a slapping ass album. I can't find one thing wrong with that album, and it probably was. They did go a little bit radio in the 2000s. I still loved it, don't get me wrong, but I think these two albums, Science and Make Yourself, my favorite. Fungus Among Us, I know everybody always likes to pick the first album as their best one, but I think Make Yourself is the most complete of their albums up to this point. Enema of the State by Blink-182, kind of like Weezer in that way that I'm having fun. Every once in a while, it's not everything has to be Stairway to Heaven. Sometimes you can just have some fun. And of those bands that are just, using power chords and catchy riffs and melodies and a fun verse, chorus, verse, they were probably the most fun out of all of them. I loved it. Just a three-man band could get that kind of sound. It was a lot of fun. They were kind of like the fun version of Nirvana in that regard, and that, they had a really kick-ass drummer, kind of a unique vocalist, and then we were able to get that kind of just unique sound that no one else had. But yeah, that's a real fun album. Human Clay by Creed. Now, I know you guys are like, oh, come on, Mike, Creed. Look, guys, they didn't sell 50 million albums because none of you listened to it. I know you listened to it. I know you loved it. I know you probably saw them live. I know that you people did listen to Creed. Don't even pretend. I did too. And I think Human Clay was probably their best album because it fixed a lot of things that I thought were wrong with My Own Prison. But it was before they become kind of self-parody by the time Weathered came out. They did kind of become self-parody after a while. I think Mark Tremonti was the real talent in that band. That's why, eventually they trimmed the fat and they added Miles Kennedy and they became Alter Bridge, a band I absolutely love. And I think the Creed actually held Mark Tremonti back a little bit as just one of the best modern-day rock guitarists that there is. But it was kind of evident in this album that he was wanting to break out a little bit, and that was very, very evident early with the band. I didn't think that as big as they were, I didn't think they would last for that reason, because I could tell that creatively Mark Tremonti wanted to do different things there. But again, I know a lot of people they don't ever consider nostalgia when they're doing a list like this, or things that are considered embarrassing now, or something like that. I don't care. I loved the album when it came out. You know what? And I will look at it and be like, yeah, it was pretty simplistic, but I'll still play it and be air drumming the whole time, So it is what it is. Issues by Korn. I think that this is right there with Follow the Leader. But they got a lot more radio production. I think they really got a cleaned up sound. They got a real heavy producer who said, I'm going to get a lot of these songs played on the radio. And I don't think that took away from it though. And again, I'm not one of those who thinks once you go to radio, you're bad. I just think it's clear that you've changed your sound a little bit. But what I loved about that album is it's kind of like, they did this sound where they always had the slappy loose bass string sound, and they really just perfected it with sound like Make Me Bad and Somebody Someone. Really such a unique kick-ass sound, and I love it. Falling Away From Me is just so good. Trash is kind of my 5-star from that album that a lot of people, I don't think it was ever played on the radio, but Trash, really, really good song. Now that's 1A, 1B with the winner of the year 1999. Another one that people might consider embarrassing at this time point, guys, but you know what? It was a big deal when it came out. And I'm talking about Significant Other by Limp Bizkit. Now, I won't lie. I did not like Limp Bizkit when they came out for the dumbest reason. Now, when you're a teenager, guys, you get hung up on stupid stuff. At the time, years, I used to have a fitted baseball cap that I wore backwards because I saw Ken Griffey Jr. do it. And Ken Griffey Jr. was the coolest baseball player ever, right? And then when Fred Durst did it, and that became, everybody was like, oh, what's up, Fred Durst? Every time I walked into a room, it was annoying. But anyway, unlike everyone else, I'm not embarrassed that I love this album. I still spin it all of the time. Sure, this is all just speckled with nostalgia, but I still have a great time with it. Break Stuff is still the all-time Having a Bad Day song, and I'm not embarrassed about it. Rearranged is an earworm of all earworms. I still know every single word of In Together now with Method Man. It's just such a fun album. And Fred Durst was not a likable person, but there's a lot of people, actors, novelists, musicians that I don't like them personally, but I like their craft, I like their art, I like what they put out. And Limp Bizkit, Significant Other, no different, as my favorite album of 1999. And I know some of you are probably pretending that you didn't like it, but you're kind of secretly nodding right now, and you're just saying you did it all for the nookie, right, guys? But that is all of the albums of the 90s. So now it's time, guys, for the big enchilada. What is the best album of the 1990s? Tough decision, because as you can see, guys, I've talked about this for an hour now. I could probably go on for longer, honestly. There's so many albums that I didn't even mention that I really did like. But for this pick, I have to go with Nevermind by Nirvana. Because like I said, guys, my generation was waiting for that change in the music style to where we make it our own. Like our parents' moment, where they had their big revolution in music. This was ours for us. Smells Like Teen Spirit changed everything. It was our coming of age, if you will. It was our moment to stand up, rebel against our parents, and say, you know what? We're tired of all that 80s pop music that you guys are always shoving down our throats. We're tired of all this. We're doing things our way. We're doing things loud and proud and in your face. And I think Nevermind really encapsulated that whole movement. It made wearing flannel shirts both on your shoulders and around your waist really, really cool. And I think it all started with Nevermind, a perfect album from beginning to end, and it is every bit deserves the legacy that it has as, maybe the best album of the 90s. That's definitely going to be my pick, but I probably do just a top 10 of my albums from the 1990s. I don't know if it would be the one from each year. Probably not, because I think some years obviously are stronger than other. I think like 93 through 96 might be the hardest for me because that is my years in high school where all I mean, this is back when, guys, we would get an album, we would open it up, and we would get out the lyrics, and we would study the lyrics and everything, and know all the band members' names. It was just a different time, a different generation. So, yeah, a lot of us were just much more obsessed with music at that time period. Now, I know there's sure there probably is still a lot of kids who are still obsessed with music. My kids could give a damn. They're all about their tablets and video games. They don't care about music. And I feel like a failure as a parent on my behalf, but, I do what I can. I don't want to force my music on them. But, yeah, it was a great, great decade for sure. And I thought it was no decade that I wanted to kind of tackle more for my first segment on decades, because I feel like nostalgia does hit like a 30-year cycle. Every 30 years, there's a great nostalgia for a time period. Like when I was a kid in the 80s, the 50s was like make a big comeback. You look like Back to the Future and things like that. It made such a big comeback. Now you look at last decade, the 80s, Stranger Things, things like that. 80s made a real big comeback. And I think now it's the 90s turn. It seems like the 90s are starting to make a big comeback, because I'm actually hearing things about people actually buying CDs again. That it's actually on the uptick again. It's so wild, guys, because I don't even have a CD player anymore. I have to play these. I have to play them through like my Xbox. That's wild, right? But hey, times change, but you know what? The music stays the same. And with them being crazy about editing things these days, I want to make sure that I always keep my hard copies available. So guys, that was my best rock albums of the 1990s. I'm sure you have some disagreements. I would love to hear about them. Drop them below. I would love to hear about things that I left off, things that you think are great, complete albums. And yeah, it's a great conversation to have. And I hope you guys will do that down below. I don't know what I'll do next. It's probably going to be movie related, but I am excited to hopefully continue this segment. So if you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you guys think of it. And yeah, I will talk to you in the comments down below. Rock on, my friends.